Hello, and welcome to the Urban Classroom. Hi, I'm Mrs. Briggs, and thank you for joining me today in the Urban Classroom. Today, I'm going to be teaching a lesson called The 13 Original English Colonies. It is a summary of Unit 1 for 8th grade U.S. History. In this unit, we will learn why the colonists left England and settled in the New World. Let's get started with European colonization. There are different kings who lived in England, and they will decide to send groups of people to the New World to establish colonies. Now, these colonies, they were established for different reasons, such as economic, religious, and social reasons. There will be a total of 13 English colonies, and these colonies are located on the Atlantic coast of North America. These colonies will be divided into 3 different regions, such as the New England region, the Mid-Atlantic region, the Southern region, are all part of the 13 colonies. Based on the environment and geographical conditions, each colony has to decide how they are going to build their economy. How will they make their money? It all depends on the conditions of the geography in the area once you get off the ship. Now, before the colonists came to the New World, they had expectations. One of the things that they expected is to have their basic human rights protected. See, the colonists, they knew about older documents, such as the Magna Carta. This document was written in the year 1215. That is a long time ago. Well, this document, it forced the king to protect certain noblemen's rights and privileges. For example, this document informed the king that he could no longer take away a freeman's property. Cannot do that anymore, because in times past, the king could just take your property away from you. And no one could do anything because the king had a military, the king had an army, and if you objected or spoke out, you could be punished or even sent to prison. Now that leads us to the second most important thing about this document. According to the Magna Carta, the king could no longer put a freeman in prison without a fair trial, and the person had to appear before a jury. Well, these rights were not extended to everyone. They were extended to free white men who were of noble origin. I mean, they had status, they had clout within the government, or they were wealthy or had a lot of land. So these noblemen, they had protection under the Magna Carta. So when the colonists got to the New World, they believed that they had certain rights as well that should be protected. The first colony is the colony of Jamestown. It's located today in modern-day Virginia. Well, the year was 1607. A group of people, they will leave England and they are bound going to the New World. This is the first permanent English colony, because there was another colony called Roanoke, but something happened at that colony where we don't really know what happened to the people. They disappeared. They came up missing. Nobody knows what happened to them. And so that colony, it failed. That was Roanoke. But years later, you're going to have Jamestown. Jamestown will be a successful colony, but it didn't start off like that. See, at first, the people who came to Jamestown, they were coming for economic reasons, and mostly men. And they brought items that would help them look for gold, because they were hoping that they would find gold and be able to profit from it by selling it back in England. Well, unfortunately, they're not going to find a lot of gold. They're going to find a lot of mosquitoes, and they will get sick, and a lot will die from a disease called malaria. It will get so bad that you're going to lose most of the colonists during the winter. if that weren't bad enough, the colonists, they were running out of food. See, they didn't bring the right items. They didn't pack the right gear to be successful in the new world because they were so focused on making money. They had their mind on their money and the money on their mind. And so they did not have the right tools or the right resources or provisions to prepare for a successful winter in Jamestown. So a lot of people died. It got so bad they were eating horses. They were looking for rats in the fields to eat. It got so bad that some people even turned towards cannibalism, where they were eating other people. No bueno. It's not good. But after a while, one of the colonists got a hold of Spanish tobacco. Now, Spain, they had a monopoly on tobacco, and it was not to be given to other countries to sell, because only Spain wanted to sell the tobacco. So if you were caught selling tobacco illegally, the punishment could be death for a Spaniard. But one of the colonists got a hold of it and planted it and found out that, this area is really good for growing tobacco. And so before you know it, just about everybody in the colony of Jamestown began to plant tobacco, and they were able to profit greatly from selling tobacco. And so they became, a lot of them made a lot of money, first millionaires right there in Jamestown. And now that they have some stability, they had to begin to make some rules and some regulations about how they were going to trade. That brings us to the first representative group, called the Virginia House of Burgesses. A Burgess, that word, it means representative. So the people in Jamestown, they are going to get together and elect their own representatives to form their government, which is called the House of Burgesses. It was a group of political leaders, and they are trying to start self-government. One of the main things that they're going to do when they get established is decide how they are going to profit from the tobacco. What should the price be? How should we sell it? And that decision is very important, because for almost the next 150 years, that is the primary way that people in the colony of Jamestown were going to make their money, is through tobacco. Now, the purpose of the House of Burgesses was to make sure that certain people in the colony had their basic human rights protected while they were living in the New World. To be a member of the House of Burgesses, it was only open to white men, but you had to own land. You have to be a property owner, then you were allowed to vote. There's another group of people who are leaving England and coming to the New World. They are the Pilgrims. Now, the year is 1620. That's a very important date. The year 1620, and Pilgrims will sail to the New World, and they will settle in modern-day Massachusetts, an area called Plymouth. So the Pilgrims are from Plymouth. They were on a ship called the Mayflower, and this ship, they did not own this ship. They had to pay for this ship for the passage over, and so a contract was signed where once they get to the New World, they will send back crops, and they will also send back the animal pelt, like from the beaver, and that will be a way to pay for their passage over to the New World. Now, while the people are on the Mayflower, they decided they had to have some form of self-government, because the king is so far away. They have to have rules. They have to be able to work together. They needed to depend on each other and to survive. So they agreed to sign what is called the Mayflower Compact. Now, when I say they, I'm only referring to the men. The women were not allowed to sign this contract. Okay, only the men. And it's called the Mayflower Compact. From this document, we get the idea of majority rules. That's where people vote, and then the one who has the most vote wins, or the one who has the most vote, that's the plan that we work with. So we got this idea of majority rule from the Pilgrims who signed the Mayflower Compact. The Pilgrims, they believed that As an English citizen, they had to be loyal to their king, and they also, in the absence of the king, have to be able to have basic human rights, and they had to have order in their colony so that everyone could survive. Years later, there's another colony. It's called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And in this colony, you're going to have a group of people who will leave England, but they're leaving for religious reasons, but it's a little bit different. See, the people from Plymouth, they left England because they're being bullied, they're being persecuted, and they didn't want to be forced to worship in a way that they were not comfortable with in regards to the Church of England. But the people from Massachusetts Bay, they kind of thought they were better than other people. And so what they wanted is called religious isolation. They wanted to be left alone. They only wanted to be around people who think like they did. So they were very strict, and they didn't really tolerate other people's religion. They will settle in an area that's called Massachusetts Bay. Now, the leaders of the church played a very important role in day-to-day life. The ministers of the church, they control the local government. They will hold town meetings, and their goal was to promote a life of virtue. A life of virtue is like being good for God. And if you're not being good for God, then you were pretty much threatened every day about fire and brimstone and going to hell, and a lot of punishment for people who did not follow the rules. You could be beaten, could be placed in a stockade where people were throwing rotten food at you, even feces could be thrown at you. Not good. So Massachusetts Bay, you have to like really follow the rules and be on point if you're going to live in Massachusetts Bay, because if you don't, you could get banished. That means they could kick you out. Get your kids, get your wife, get your personal belongings, and get out. So that's Massachusetts Bay Colony. There are several colonists who said, I don't really like living in Massachusetts Bay. They too strict over there and they hurting people. So we probably need to find another place to go. Well, there's a man named Roger Williams. He is going to establish a new colony that is called Rhode Island. And in the colony of Rhode Island, Roger Williams wants the people to have religious freedom. There's a lady, her name was Anne Hutchinson. She got kicked out of Massachusetts Bay because she was saying things that the church didn't like. For instance, like she could talk to God, and that not just men are the ones who could be church leaders. She said, you know, anybody could have a relationship with God, and anybody could be a leader in the church, and not just the men. So she was really outspoken, and the church ministers, they didn't like that. They took her to court for that. She had to go to court because they said, you know, what you're saying is a bunch of lies. It's blasphemy. And if you don't stop saying that, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Well, it just got to a point where Anne Hutchinson was found guilty, and she will be banished. She leaves the colony, and she's going to go with Roger Williams and a lot of other colonists. They're going to leave Massachusetts Bay, and they're going to go to Rhode Island, because in Rhode Island, they agreed that nobody would bother you. Like if you didn't want to practice the religion of the group, that's fine. We're not going to bother you. You can have religious freedom. And that was Rhode Island. Now, tragically, Anne Hutchinson, later on, she's going to get killed by Native Americans. They're going to kidnap her daughter. So it's unfortunate that her future wasn't very good because of the situation with the Native Americans killing her. But she tried to speak out for rights, and she tried to speak out really for women's rights. Now, let's talk about the Fundamental Order of Connecticut. This is a document. It is a document that was written by a man named Thomas Hooker. Now, Thomas Hooker is the one who established the colony called Connecticut. See, each colony was beginning to develop their own form of limited self-government. And so this document called the Fundamental Order of Connecticut, it was based on individual rights. And this document was the first example of a written constitution that was set up in a new world. This document was explaining to the government what the government could do and what the government could not do. So that's very significant that there's now an actual document that provides rules and guidelines for the government. So that was Thomas Hooker, and he wrote this document called the Fundamental Order of Connecticut. Now remember, each group of colonists, they're coming up with a way to make sure they have law and order in their colonies. They're creating a form of self-government in their colonies. All right, one other laws that will be created by these groups of government leaders is the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, so this transatlantic slave trade was a system where Africans were enslaved and brought to the New World. Now, Spain originally worked with Portuguese, and they started this transatlantic slave trade, and then eventually Britain will get involved in this slave trade as well. This system was just so cruel and inhumane. I don't really understand, how did it even happen? Why would it be okay to sell humans for items like a blanket, like rum, like weapons? Why would that be okay? Well, it happened, and slaves were forced into ships where they suffered horrible conditions. No showers, no toilets. They were in shackles. They were in chains. They were treated very cruelly, with being beaten, being raped, starved, even murdered on those ships. And this lasts as early as the 1500s, way into the 1800s. So for nearly 300 years, traveling from Europe to Africa to the West Indies, and then to America for hundreds of years, selling slaves. It's called the transatlantic slave trade because trans means to go across, and then they're going across the Atlantic Ocean. So that's how we get the name transatlantic slave trade. It used to be called the triangular slave trade because it seemed like the route was a triangle, leaving Europe, going to Africa, and from Africa to the Americas, and then repeat. Okay. During the trip, the forced trip from Africa to America, you have what is called the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage was the longest part of the journey from West Africa going across the Atlantic Ocean. Typically, it would take about 2 months for slave ships to reach America. And slavery, this is a system. This is ran by the government, and it's used to increase the economy for all of those 13 English colonies, as well as around the world, because Spain used slavery in the colonies that they had in the Caribbean, as well as in South America. So for the English, the first slaves will arrive in Jamestown, and that will be in the year 1619. So a little bit more than 400 years ago. Now you notice there's a picture of a shark in the bottom right-hand corner. The reason why that picture of the shark is there is to let you know that when the slave ships were traveling from Africa going into the New World, you would see like sharks at the back of the ship, following the ship. And the reason why they would follow the ship is because when the enslaved Africans died or were killed on that ship, or even committed suicide by jumping off the side of the ship, the sharks would follow because that became food for them. And so it was customary to see sharks following slave ships because the slaves who were thrown overboard or jumped overboard were a food source. Okay, now let's focus on the three regions that these colonists will form. The New England region, when I say New England region, I'm referring to the colonies of Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. In this area, they have rocky soil, and the winters are long and very harsh. It's a very short growing seasons. Now, this area was better suited for small farms, for fishing and shipping. The settlers in this area, they could cut down trees and use that trees for lumber, and they can use that lumber to build houses. They can use the lumber to make ships, and they can also send that lumber back to England because it was very valuable natural resource. A lot of the people who worked in this area were sailors, they were farmers, they were fishermen, they were also merchants. Now, when you are trying to build your economy, one of the most important things that you'll need is a harbor. A harbor is where you store the ships. They can be natural harbors where ships can go in and out. They can trade up and down rivers and different waterways. So by having a harbor, you had a very good way to transport your goods and trade them. It's a way to make your money. So each of the regions will have natural harbors. Now let's take a look at the southern region. When I say the southern region, I'm referring to Virginia, Maryland, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. This area was very flat. The soil is very fertile. That means it's very good for growing different kind of crops, different kind of plants. And in this area, the southern colonists, they chose to plant what are called cash crops. Cash crops are not something necessarily that you eat, but it is something that grows. It could be tobacco, it could be rice, cotton, it could be indigo. And these products will be sold for to make money, to build the economy. Usually the landowners who were very rich, they had large plantation, and a large plantation can have hundreds of slaves. Now, each colony had slaves, but if you lived in New England or the Mid-Atlantic region, you probably have the average family maybe 3 or 4 slaves. But in the southern region, rich landowners, they can own hundreds of different enslaved Africans, and they would work on what is called a plantation. Think of a plantation like a very large farm, and the way that the money is made is by growing these cash crops. It's an agricultural farming operation that is being used on the plantation, and so they heavily relied on slave labor to build their economy. Slave labor means you don't pay people to do the work. You force them to do the work, and if they don't do the work, then they're beaten or they're convinced otherwise to follow the instruction. Usually they're being beaten to do the work. And our last region will be the Mid-Atlantic region. When I say the Mid-Atlantic region, I'm referring to the area of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Now, if these names sound familiar to you, that's because later on when we get to Unit 2, these 13 colonies will become 13 states. There'll be some problems with England, and the colonists will eventually go to war and get their independence. But for now, they are only called colonies. Now, in the Mid-Atlantic colonies, there's a lot of trees in the area, there's a lot of forest area, and the settlers, they'll cut down the trees and have lumber for building houses, for shipbuilding, and also trading that lumber, selling it back to England. And the area is very good for growing crops, but they chose not to grow cash crops in this area. This area is going to be known as the breadbasket because a lot of grains are going to be sold in the Mid-Atlantic region. A lot of grains will be grown there. Grains like wheat, rye, barley, millet, those kind of grains can be grown in the Mid-Atlantic region. Now, if you come to the Mid-Atlantic region, people are not going to bother you about your religious preferences. You were allowed to have freedom of religion here in the Mid-Atlantic region. And there were other jobs that you can have, maybe like making paper or making iron in this area. There are different ways that they could make money, but mostly through grains, growing grains. Now, that brings us to our last topic. It's called the First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening is an event, and it is about church leaders having these outdoor meetings in these large open fields. They're praying, they're asking God for help. They feel that they need support from God. So people are getting like really religious in this time period called the First Great Awakening. This event will encourage more people to ask for representation in the government. It will also, the church leaders are talking about equality for people. So a lot of changes are about to happen during this First Great Awakening. It's mostly happening in the New England region, where the people are outside, they're in the fields, and they're just asking God for help. The First Great Awakening is going to lead us into our Unit 2, which is the causes of the American Revolution, and you will see that the colonists really feel that they need to have more representation in government, and they want to be a part of what's called British Parliament. That is the government leaders and lawmakers that live over there in England and work with the king. So today we have learned about the colonists who left England, and then they came to the New World to settle for different reasons, such as economic, social, and religious reasons. And that's Unit 1. So I want to thank you for joining me today. Be sure to watch the next video lesson to learn more about U.S. history, because this is where we are learning about the 13 original English colonies to the settling of the Western frontier after the Civil War and Reconstruction, which is 8th grade U.S. history. So again, thank you for stopping by the Urban Classroom. Make it a great day and have a great day. Bye.